Hello guys, welcome back. Today in this video I'm going to discuss HTML form input elements. In the previous video I have discussed what is the importance of form tag and how form is created in HTML. In this video I'm going to explain different form input elements. Form cannot do itself anything without form elements. With the help of input form elements, we can create components that can collect the data from the user. We have discussed the basic input elements like text box, password field, buttons, and reset button. But in this video, I'm going to explain more input elements and their important attributes. So let's get started. Here I have created two text boxes, text box 1 and text box 2. There is a label that will point to the text box 1 and there is another label that will point to the text box 2. Text box 1 having a default value that is set to 1000, and in the text box 2 we have set a default value that there is some more text to be displayed in the text box. So let's see how it look on the browser. So I'm going to open it in the browser. Here text box 1 have data 1000, and in text box 2 there is some more data, but all the data is not displayed on a single text box because by default text box has 20 characters to display on the text box. But here if you want to change the width of the text box, you can also do it with the size attribute. So I'm going to set the size here as 10 characters, and here I'm going to set the size equals to 30 characters. So I'm going to save it and you will see now the first text box having smaller width, and whereas text box 2 having the bigger width. It's in your hand, you can set the width of the text box. You can also do it with the help of CSS. For CSS I'm going to select the input element, so I'm use input as a selector, and we can set the width equals to 400 pixel. Okay, so you can see both text box having the width of 400 pixel. You can set the width of individual text boxes by yourself. Now I'm going to explain an important topic, that is difference between read only, hidden, and disable attribute. Okay, for this I'm going to create a button here. Okay, so use input, submit, and value will be submit. First I'm going to explain a read only. When I apply read only attribute to the text box 1, you will see text box 1 now becomes a read only. It means you cannot add content to the text box 1. We can just read the content. Okay, so when I submit the data, text box 1 having the value 1000 and text box 2 having the value that is entered. Okay, now if I change it to the disable attribute, it means we cannot submit the value of text box 1 to the server. So when I try to submit the data, you see there is only one value that is going to be sent to the server. The text box 1 is now disabled. Third, I'm going to explain hidden. In the hidden attribute, you will see text box is not displayed onto the screen, but the default value, that is 1000, or that is already entered into that text box 1, will be submitted to the server. So when I submit the data, you will see the value of text box 1 will be sent to the server. And now I'm going to discuss the attributes of password type. I have added a password input field into the form. Whenever a user enters some data into the password field, that data will be not shown to the user because that data will be covered by some asterisk signs. Let's first see the output of this form. Okay, now if I'm enter some username Pankaj, I'm trying to enter some password. Now you see the password is not shown to the user. If you add some regular expression to this password, like the user can create the password of some special characters or some special alphabet, some numbers. So for this you have to add an attribute called pattern into your password field. First I'm going to add a required attribute so that this field cannot be left blank. Okay, now I'm going to add pattern attribute which tells which kind of characters the password should have. Okay, so I'm adding first, the first letter should be a capital, so I use A to Z. Okay, second character can be a combination of alphabets or numbers, so for that I use capital A to Z, small A to Z, 0 to 9. There should be no special character. Okay, so I use star, so it means any number of characters. Okay, now I just want there should be at least one number. Okay, for that I use the regular expression 0 to 9, so it means there could be at least one number. The last number can be of anything, A to Z, capital A to Z, 0 to 9, any number of character. So I make this pattern for the user to create a password of a specific pattern. Okay, now I'm also going to add some title so that it will describe kind of the password is. So I entered a valid password must contain alphabets and numbers. First character should be capital alphabet and must contain a number, and there is no special character. Okay, so this is the title that will be display onto the screen. Okay, so let's save the code and see the output. Now if I enter username Pankaj, if I submit the button, it will first not submitted. If I enter some data, okay, so this is the title that will be shown when user trying to submit some wrong input. Okay, so if I entered first letter should be capital and next letter should be anything like a combination of letters and numbers, but there should be at least one number. I enter one number here, so if I submit the data will be submit. You see the first letter is an alphabet, there is a combination of letters, and there should be a at least one number, so it will fill all the requirement of the pattern. So that's why the data will be submitted to the server, otherwise the data cannot be submitted to the server. Okay, now if I'm trying to add some password but I cannot see the password. Okay, if you want to see the password like this here, if I trying to submit the data and I just want to know what is my password, if I enter some wrong password or not, click on show password. So show password field will tell you whether you have entered a correct pattern or not. This is a kind of a toggle, so you can toggle your password. You can show the password or hide the password. Okay, how we can create this toggle? For that I'm going to add one new input field here. So I add input as a checkbox. When we click this checkbox, the password will be shown to the user, and again when we click this checkbox, the password will be hide from the screen. Okay, so I add name of the checkbox is check. Okay, So I add show password, show text to the user. So on click, so I'm adding an event called on click. So whenever the user click on this checkbox, the script will be fired and password will be shown to the user. So I add some user function called show password. Okay, so this is the function which will be called whenever you click the checkbox. So I have to create this function. So for that, I'm creating a script tag. In the script tag, I'm going to create a function named show password. Okay, so first I'm going to collect the input of the password field. For that, I use a variable called x and find out the input. So I use document dot get element by id and target our password field. So I use the id as pass. The pass id is already mentioned. So I use that pass id here, and now I'm using a condition if x dot type. Type is the type of input. So if the type equals to password, then the type will be changed to text. Okay, the type will be converted to a normal text box. Else, if that field is not password, then x dot type will remain same as password. Okay, now I'm saving the script and check whether the script will be executed or not. I'm also adding one br here. Okay, now let's see the output. I'm going to refresh the screen first. Okay, now the checkbox now appear onto the form. Now, if I enter username as Pankaj, if I enter password field as this, and whenever I want to see whether I entered a correct pattern of the password or not, I click this show password field. So it will show your password. You have not entered the correct pattern. So now I'm going to enter a correct pattern. So first letter should be capital. There will be a combination of characters. There can be some number. If I submit the data, your data is going to be submit to the server because you entered a correct pattern. Okay, next input type I'm going to explain is radio button. Radio button is an input type where you can select one option out of many options. Okay, here I'm going to use an input and type equals to radio. Okay, now first I'm creating a label for that. So I'm use label. I use for attribute for linking label to the input type. So I use for attribute and value equals to gender. Same value I'm going to put into the id so that radio button and labels will be linked together. Okay, now I'm giving the label as gender. Okay, now in the name attribute I have to mention the name. So I use gender again. Okay, so this is the name that is the server use for selecting this input type. Okay, now so first option I use male. Okay, now I'm copy this radio button for 3 times. In the second I use female, and third we use other. Okay, one thing noted that name attribute should be same for all radio button. So if you want your option button worked in a combination, you should have name attribute common in all the fields. So I'm saving the code and see the output in the browser. Okay, let's add 2pr out here so that the submit button will be next to the option button. Okay, so I'm going to open the browser again. So here you will see there is a text button, there is a password button, and there are some radio buttons. So all these radio buttons are behaving like an option button. So if you select first radio button, then the first button is selected. But if you want to select second radio button, first option will be removed. Similarly, if you want to select the third option, the second option will be removed. So the radio button will work as an option button. Okay, now if you want to that mail will be already selected, so you can use here the attribute called checked. So it means this attribute will be already selected. Okay, now again I'm saving the code, refresh the things. Now the mail is already been checked, so if you want to change it, you can change here. Okay, so this is what we called option radio button. Now next is we can create different checkboxes. Checkboxes is similar to option button, but here I'm going to select multiple options. So in order to select multiple options, we use checkbox. Okay, for that I'm going to create input type as a checkbox. Okay, so type equals to checkbox. So I'm going to also add one more label here, so that the label for checkbox. So I'm using technology. Okay, so same for field I'm using in the ID. Okay, now in the label I'm use technologies. Okay, so I created first checkbox, I named it as C language. Okay, now if I'm going to create the name, should be I use checkbox 1. Okay, now I'm going to create 3 more checkboxes. Okay, so in this I use Java, and here I'm use front end. So I don't want the checkboxes work as a combination like in a radio button, so the name field should be different. Okay, now I have saved the changes and see the output in the browser. Here there is a label called technologies, and these are some checkboxes. If I want to learn technology like C language and Java, so I can select both the option, even though I can select the front end also. So all 3 options now going to be work. Okay, now I'm entering the username as Pankaj and the password as a. Okay, so now I've submit the result. You see here in the output, you see gender equals to on, checkbox is on, and checkbox 2 is on. So instead of on, I want to print the value of the checkbox or some radio button. For that I use the attribute value equals to male. Okay, so I copy this value and print in the female also. So instead of male I use female, and here others for use other. Similarly, if you want that previously this first checkbox is already checked, so again you can use the checked, and you can also specify the value. So value equals to C language, and in this value should be Java, and third in value should be front end. Okay, now I've saved the changes and you will see the result here. So if I enter the username as Pankaj, so I refresh the thing. Now username is equal to Pankaj, the first name should be Pankaj 123. Okay, so I select mail and use CS and front end. So now I'm submit the data. You will see user is equal to Pankaj, password is Pankaj123, gender is male, checkbox 1 selected as C language, checkbox 3 is selected as a front end. Now the value is being going to the server as a proper way. Next input type I'm going to explain is number. So number input type is basically used to create numbered box where you can only enter the numbers, not enter the text. For that you can use input type equals to number. Okay, now I'm also adding a label here, and for that I use age as a label name. Okay, so I use age in the name, I also enter age. Now I'm also adding br here. So I'm going to create a new input field where you can just enter numbers. Save the changes and see the output in the browser. So here you can enter only numbers, not enter text. So you can enter your age as 30. Okay, but if I mistakenly add 300, so it will be allowed 300. So if you want that there should be a limit, you can set into the age. So for that you can use the two more attribute. One is called min, that the minimum age you can enter 18, and maximum age you can enter as 100. Okay, now save the changes. Okay, now you see when I refresh the field, if I trying to enter 200, it will not allow you to submit this age. So here, so the limit will limit the maximum or minimum number you can enter. Okay, similarly if you trying to enter the age 15 and trying to submit the data, it will again give you a message that the number should be greater or equal to 18. Min and max attribute will add some more validation into the numbers. Okay, now you can also add step here. Okay, step means how many steps the next input will take. So if I add, by default it is 1. Like if we want to change the numbers like 20, 21, 22, if you want to change with steps 2, so every time you will increment of 2. So 18, 20, 24, 26. So step will behave like a increment counter. If I entered 3, the number will be incremented by 3. If we not set this field, so by default it will take step as 1. Next input type I'm going to explain is date. So use input type equals to date. Okay, so again I'm using a label as DOB. So I'm using date of birth. Okay, so same DOB I've used here for the ID and for name also. Okay, okay, now date of birth will help you to enter your date of birth. So it will display a calendar in your form. So let's save the changes. Now you will see when you want to enter some date, you just click on this icon, so it will display a calendar to you. Now you can select according the date. Suppose my date of birth is 1985 October 13. Okay, so I trying to enter username as Pankaj and password will be PANKAJ at the rate 123. Mail language I select, age I'm going to select as 35, and date of birth I already mentioned. So if I submit the data, okay, you see and the date of birth will be printed here. So 1985 10/13. Okay, now if you want to add some date of time, you can also add it. So I again copy the same thing. Now instead of date of birth I use date of time. So I use T, and I also add some changes here. T, date of time. So instead of type date we can use time. So it will also add time input element to your form. So save the changes. Now here the time is available. You can set date of time using the type time. Okay, now next if you want to combine both date and time, you can use the attribute called, you can use attribute called date time local. So it will display both date and time input type in combination. Okay, so you can date of birth with time. Okay, so date of birth time, I changed the name here, date of birth time, date of birth time. So if I see the code and see the changes here, it will first display the date and then time. So you can select your date of birth and time as well in combination. Okay, now the next attribute is month. If you want to display the month, okay, like you want to display the current month, so you can use the type as month. So I'm just copying the code, again paste it. So if I use a month here as a label, so if I mentioned current month, okay, and here I use month and copy the same in the id field so that label and input will be linked. So instead of date time local, if I mention type equals to month, it will show the current month. So you can select the month from the previous field, or you can set this month. Okay. Okay. Similarly, there is another attribute called week. So if you want to specify the current week, you can also mention it. In the month we use week, and in id I use week, and in the type field, instead of month we can use week. So week specify input element where you can select the week. Okay, now I will save the change and see the output. Here you will see the week. Okay, so in 2000 you can select September, and you can select the week. Like if you want to select 36th week, so the week 36 of 2000 being selected. Okay, next input type I am going to explain is email. Here I'm going to use a label for email, so I use label email. So email as a label, and for that I use input type equals to email. Okay, so name is the name that going to be used for the server, so I use email. id again email, so that label and input field will be linked. Okay, so now you know the format that the email consists of first username followed by @ sign and then domain name. Okay, so I just save the result and see the output in the browser. Okay, now refresh the scene. Here email field has been constructed. Now if I just entered email as Pankaj and trying to submit the thing, so please include @ in the email. Pankaj is missing @, so if I add @gmail, so it will submit the result. Okay, here you will see email. You can also create your own validation. For that you can use the pattern attribute like we have used earlier. Okay, now the next input type is file. If you want to upload some multimedia content to the server, you can use the file attribute, the input type. File input type, for that I use, first I'm creating a label. For that I use file, so I entered upload your document. Okay, so this is the label for the file input type. Now let's create input type equals to file. Okay, here name again I use file, the name that is used by the server, and for id again I use file, so that label and your input will be linked together again. So I'm just saving the changes and see the output in the browser. Okay, now you will see there is a button will be displayed onto the screen that will tell you to choose the file. So if I click on choose button, I can select any of the file. If you want to send this file to the user, you can click on the file. The file will be uploaded to your input element, and when we press the submit button, the file should be submitted to the server. If you want that, you can only send a particular kind of the file to the server, like here I mentioned document, but I upload image. So if you just want to add some constraint, like only these category of the files can be uploaded, you can use accept attribute and mention what kind of you want to attach. If images, image only, this will accept only the image as a file to be uploaded. If you want to change to audio, so it will accept only the audio file. Similarly, if you want to accept only the video file to be uploaded, you can set as video.pdf. Okay, so it will accept only the PDF file to be uploaded. Let's save the changes and see the result. I refresh the output. Let's choose. Okay, here you will see the PDF document. So it will now accept only the PDF file. So if I choose some PDF like data structure algorithm interview questions. Okay, now if I select this, submit the document, you will see data structure.pdf. So I cannot upload other than the PDFs. Okay, but if you want multiple documents to be uploaded, you can write it by comma. So if you want that doc file can be uploaded, or docs file can be uploaded, or text file can be uploaded, so you can mention the accept attribute by comma. You can add multiple format separated by comma. So now your file can accept either PDF, docs, text format to be uploaded. The next attribute I'm going to discuss is search input type. In the 4, I'm going to create label for search input box. So search basically create a text box where you can enter some text you want to be searched. It is the same text box that Google search will use. Instead of file, I use search so that label will be linked to here. ID will be search, name will be search, and type will also be a search. So it will create a search box for you. You can search any text. Okay, this is a search box. You can enter something and there is a cross already been appear, so you can cross that thing. So it will create a search box. Okay, now you will submit the data. Pankaj is the text you are going to be search. Okay, next input type I'm going to explain is URL. Okay, so to explain this, I'm just copy this code, and instead of type search I use the net value as URL. Okay, so if you want to specify some absolute URL as a text box, you can use this input element as URL. Okay, suppose I just want to enter my website address, so instead of using normal text I can use this type equals to URL. Okay, so I just replace the name as website. Okay, now just save the changes and see the output in the browser. Okay, now here we have a, a special text box that will use for the absolute URL address. You need to add absolute address, so I use http beta labs.in. Okay, when I submit the data, so it will be submit as the website URL to the server. The next input type I'm going to explain is button. We have already seen the submit button. Okay, so submit button is like when we press that button, the data will be submitted to the server. But if you want to create a button that behaves like a normal button, it will not submit your data. So you can use an input type called button type. Okay, so now I'm going to create a button type. For that I use input as a button. Okay, so if I use the value as click me, so you will see a new button will be placed on the browser screen. Okay, here you will see this is a submit button and this is a normal button. Okay, so when you submit the data will be submitted, but when you click on this button, nothing will be happening. So you can use this button to perform some additional events, like if I just add some event like on click, I want to some perform some alert. This is a button event. Okay, so I just add a small script over here. Okay, so now this button will behave like a event handler button. A button and a submit button, both are different. Submit button send the data to the server, whereas a button will perform some additional events. Next, I'm going to create an image button. Generally, the button we have created is just a very usual button. Okay, like, and if you want to create some graphical buttons, like there could be some image on the button, and when we press that image, the data is going to be submit. For that, I use input type as a image. Okay, here you have to use the source as well as the alt attribute. You have to add the image source. For that, submit form.png, alt as submit button. I also named as submit button. So when I save the code, so this will create a different button. So when I press the button, data is going to be submit. Okay, now look at this. So when we press the image button, there are two additional values that will be going to the server. That is, one is the x coordinate and the y coordinate of the buttons. Means when I press the button, I click on different coordinates. So server can use these coordinates and manipulate some additional tasks. So if you want to add an input type that are basically used to define the range between minimum and the maximum limit, you can use an input type as range. For that, I just copy this code and paste it here. So I'm going to represent knowledge level. So I just use knowledge level. Okay, so for that I'm use knowledge. Okay, so I use a type called range. ID will be same as for. So I can use minimum and maximum range. So I use 0 to 50%. Okay, steps dot required here. So it is by default taking steps as 1. Okay, now I save the changes. You will see the result here. So this is a range attribute. So if you specify some knowledge level, okay, so you can set the knowledge level here as this. So when I submit the button, okay, you will see the range will be 40. So you can set your different levels.